Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching us from around the world. On behalf of IABC Asia Pacific's President, Christie, and the entire Asia Pacific Board, welcome to today's webinar on Story-Powered Leadership with Soundari Mukherjea. Welcome, Soundari.
Thank you so much, Ross, and everybody at Team IABC. I'm looking forward to this interaction.
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be a great webinar. I really enjoyed our chat on Facebook Live last week, so I am really looking forward to it. So I'm Ross Monahan, and together with Carolyn Ormsby, who is also joining us today. Carolyn and I are the Joint Professional Directors for IABC Asia Pacific. So welcome to today's session. Before I introduce Soundari and tell you a little bit more about what she is going to be talking about, I want to do a little plug for an amazing organisation, IABC. IABC APAC is a regional board. We have 14 chapters in 8 countries throughout the Asia Pacific region, along with members at large in Singapore, Pakistan, China, Fiji, and Thailand. We've got an amazing range of programs for members, including webinars like this one. We have regional conferences and much more through IABC's global program, and of course our other chapters. Of particular note, of course, is IABC's certification program, and that professional certification gives you the opportunity to demonstrate your knowledge and expertise and provides evidence of your outstanding abilities. And I'd like to point out that professional development webinars like this one count towards your training hours. Now you can find out more about that and all that IABC and IABC Asia Pacific offers by going to our website at IABC APAC, that's IABCAPAC.com. I really encourage you to do that. Becoming a member of IABC is one of the best professional decisions I think I have ever made. Also joining us today is the amazing Matt McGain from the Sketch Group. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hi, Ross. I'm terrific. How are you?
Fantastic. Matt's already made a start to today's sketch. We're going to have a story about our webinar on storytelling, which is amazing. You'll be able to keep a tab on how Matt and his sketch is going by just spotlighting his video anytime throughout today's webinar. We'll come back to Matt, I think, at the end, just before our Q&A sessions, and we'll have a bit of a chat with Matt, and we'll get him to summarize his work for us. And just on that point as well, if you do have any questions, we want this to be an interactive webinar, so please make sure you post any comments. Carolyn's going to take a note of those, and we'll lead the Q&A at the end of today's session. Which brings us to today's topic, story-powered leadership, how to engage, influence, and inspire. And as I've already mentioned, Soundari Mukherjea is joining us. She is the founding partner of TESOL, which is a leadership consultancy firm focusing on business storytelling, future work skills, and transformation projects. And you're currently based in Hong Kong, but we were talking about Sydney, and I think Soundari might be, if there's anything going in Sydney, she might be interested with the way she was talking about Sydney and the beautiful views there. Soundari has 20 years of experience in finance operations, banking, and entrepreneurship with Unilever, ANZ, and now TESOL. So thank you for joining us, Soundari. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ross. And special thanks to Carolyn, Sia, and Christy. And, life is full of serendipitous connections, and that's how I view it. When I had met Genevieve Hilton, who was in Hong Kong with IABC in 2018, I had reached out to her for speaking at our leadership series, video series that we were producing. It is called Handshake, Connecting Through Stories. And she put her hand up immediately and said, very happy to be part of it. And that really led us to keeping in touch, talking about everything communication, everything storytelling, everything sourdough bread. And that sort of, connected me. She connected me when in May, when she sent a message saying, would you like to do a webinar for IABC? And if you think you would, I could connect you to Sia. And here we are meeting this amazing group of people. And I'm really thrilled and excited to start this conversation. Like you said, storytelling in business is all about connecting, engaging, inspiring, and influencing action. And we do this by helping leaders and teams build story skills. And we'd like to think that it's our BHAG of bringing humanity to the workplace. So today, I think I'll talk a little bit about the foundational piece, which is on why storytelling, and what do we even mean by stories when we are talking in a business context? Maybe some examples on where situations where we could be using stories, and with the Q&A at the end. So let's just start right in. And I know that everybody is now either working from home or trying to get into an office. So I just want to ask our audience today, and if people can just put it on the chat, really want to know, do you love working from home? Would you rather be at an office? Or is it a bit of both for most people? So work, home, office, and or both. So if you can just type those options on the chat for me. For me, it's definitely, a bit of both. Both. If I could work at home 4 days out of 5, that'll be ideal. That sounds great. Option to blend both. Linda says, love working from home. Don't miss the commute at all. I think that's true for a lot of us, right? Both. Carolyn, it's taken me 6 months to get used to working from home. Yeah, I know. It's not been that easy or that good. Love working from home, Peter. Both, and I prefer home. Great. So, thanks, Sandra. I think love working from home. Sia, hi there. What a choice. That's fantastic. Well said. I think it's a choice, having the choice. So after few weeks of or months of working from home, one fine day, at the end of a long Zoom day, I shut my laptop and I stepped out for a walk in the street that I live here for 14 years. I walk on the road and I see this friend of mine on the other side, and I smile at him and he doesn't respond. He just walks past me. And I'm thinking, oh God, okay, maybe he's really preoccupied. This is COVID times. Everybody's got a lot on their head and mind. So I walk a few more meters down the road, and then it struck me that I'm wearing a mask. So he probably couldn't see my smile. And equally so, maybe he smiled back and I couldn't see his smile. And this really got me thinking more about how we are reliant on our verbal cues, our body language, the smile on our face for really connecting with people. And I think that just anchors me back to using verbal communication as a way, as a tool to really engage and connect better. And especially so now, when all we are hearing is about, the 3 C's: communicate, communicate, communicate. So I just want to, share my screen, start off with some bit of discussion around this. So why stories? Why do stories matter? And again, if I can invite you on the chat to say, as we go along, why do you think stories matter, especially now and especially at work? I'd really love to hear from you on that. So again, something on, from a business point of view, where do you think, stories matter? And I'm going to just try and keep an eye on the chat screen as we go along. So why do you think stories are relevant in a business context? And this is a group of all business communicators. So I'm assuming everybody uses a lot more powerful way of, communicating. Stories are important because it focuses on people. Yeah, it brings us up close to people. People resonate with the message. Emotional connections are easily remembered. Stories bring important things to life, makes the messaging more memorable. Absolutely, Sandra. People remember stories, not facts and figures. It brings that emotional connection to engage. Absolutely. And all of what you said is so true about what we feel about a story, a compelling story, which is memorable than a spreadsheet, as Melinda says. And I just want to sum it up in 3 parts. We are human beings, as human beings, right from, cave painting days, we are all hardwired to stories. This is what we do organically as people. Put 2 people together, the first conversation will probably be, hey, do you know what happened last night? What did you do? So it's always very geared towards storytelling. The second reason is a little bit of social and cultural reason for us now, and especially more so in the COVID times. I believe we check our WhatsApps about 300 times a day or more. That sounds like a low number for me, but probably more than that. And we're also on a very content-rich environment, hundreds of shows from Netflix to choose from and so on, right? So we have a problem of information overload. We have a problem of choice. So it's really important to cut through all that noise and make an impact when we are connecting with people, when we are communicating with people. And there is, of course, the scientific reason. Without getting too scientific about it, definitely there is a bit of neurocoupling that happens when we say something and the listener is listening. So typically, if I'm saying, I think you may be able to tell what I'm going to say and pause, you're probably constructing the word next in your mind already. So it sort of, really connects. And this happens even more in storytelling when the neocortex of the speaker and the listener really couple and light up at the same time in the same way, the whole predictive part of it. So it is a human reason, there's a social and cultural reason, and there is a scientific reason. But for some reason at work, we don't seem to be using storytelling as much. I was chatting with this friend of mine who had just got out of a big town hall, CEO of an American bank, visiting all over the world, doing the town hall. And I asked him, oh, so what was interesting about the town hall? Give me some insider information. So I was just being a bit cheeky about it. And he said, oh, no, nothing, everything's the same. I said, that can't be. You have your CEO doing the rounds and talking about it. It can't be that he didn't say anything specific. He said, a lot of facts and figures. And that is really also, a aha moment to say, there's a CEO doing the rounds, talking about the company. There is a whole communication team behind them who spent a lot of time, effort, money, putting a deck together, and people can't remember anything. And we see this as we go around in business at work, how communications aren't sticking. Salespeople are talking like brochures. We might as well read the brochures. Or we have tech people who are excellent at tech, but they're not really connecting and communicating information. So how do we really look at going beyond this and making it happen at work? And I think that is where we have a little bit of a disconnect in terms of where storytelling is used at work. There seems to be some hesitation the minute we use the word story in a business context. There seems to be some kind of a pushback. So let's say, you're all busy people. Let's say you're all working on a deadline. You have 1 hour to go. There's some comms release that has to be done or a product proposal that has to go out. And I walk up to you and tell you, let me tell you a story. What would be your typical first reaction? Again, if you can, type in the chat or unmute if you can unmute and speak, whichever way. You're really up against a deadline. Somebody walks up to you and say, let me tell you a story. How would you react? Now, I don't have time to listen. Later, I'd love to hear it, but I don't have the time now. Absolutely. I think there is some push over lunch. That'd be great. I think there's some pushback with using the word story in a business context. So we typically say that avoid the S word. Just jump right in and say what you have to say. And equally important is to set the context of why you're saying that. If people know why you're sharing the story, what's the background, and then they say, oh, I understand, I get it, what's in it for me, kind of a thing. So very, very important to set the context in a business storytelling situation vis-a-vis in a personal story situation where, people are very happy to have a chat over a drink and listen to anything that you want to say. So context and avoiding the S word are the first 2 points that I want to leave with you. And because we also have a lot of internal communicators and people who use storytelling in a business context, even in written form, though our focus primarily is on oral storytelling, I just want to bring out a contrast. And I'm going to request either Carolyn or Ross to help me with this. So I'm going to share a couple of texts from the antitrust panel hearing that was in the US, where you had Apple, Google, Facebook, all of them, appearing before the panel. And I'm going to bring out a couple of texts. The first one is by Tim Cook. And it seems a bit longish, but I've read it and it takes about less than a minute to read that. Ross, if I can just request you to unmute and read this out for everybody. So it's, you think that's possible?
It is, when I can find the unmute button. So my name is Tim Cook, I wish. I have been Apple's Chief Executive Officer since 2011 and a proud employee since 1998. Apple is a uniquely American company whose success is only possible in this country. Motivated by the mission to put things into the world that enrich people's lives and believing deeply that the way we do that is by making the best, not the most, Apple has produced many revolutionary products, not least of which is the iPhone. We do this in part by making ourselves and our customers a promise that we will only build things that make us proud. Apple's founder, Steve Jobs, used to put it a little differently. We only make things that we would recommend to our family and friends. Since 2007, the iPhone has been one such product. The iPhone has redefined the mobile phone through its seamless integration of hardware and software, its effortless user experience, its simplicity and design, and a high-quality ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Ross. I'm just going to go away from this screen and ask all of you, what is it that you remember from that text? Again, if we can use the chat function to bring this up. What are some things that stand out for you in that text? Makes products that make us proud. iPhone, Steve Jobs, make the best, not the most. Tim loves his iPhone. How proud Tim Cook is of the company. Apple makes products that can be recommended to friends and family. So I also want to ask you, while you're doing this, to tell me, what can you make out of Tim Cook as a person? And now, these are all big business heads. So I'm definitely not going into any kind of a character discussion or anything around it. But just want to get, if you had read this text about XYZ person, what is the feeling about the character of the person that you will get? There is pride in the band, Jyoti, yeah? Can you get a sense of who he's his good speech writer? He's a proud employee, but I find it a little dry. There's an affinity to brand, emotive language, seems approachable with bland, respecting the history of the company. Very technical. Absolutely. I mean, I was glazing over some of the words like seamless integration, and I can't even remember, though I've read this text many times. I can't even remember what it is. Ecosystem, really. Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to contrast this to another style of communication. And we are only talking styles here. And I know that we do oral storytelling and this is in written format, but I just want to set the context for it. And if I can ask Carolyn to, read this for us, and you get to be Jeff Bezos for this part.
Excellent. I hope I can get Jeff's money as well. I'm Jeff Bezos. I founded Amazon 26 years ago with the long-term mission of making it Earth's most customer-centric company. My mum, Jackie, had me when she was a 17-year-old high school student in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Being pregnant in high school was not popular in Albuquerque in 1964. It was difficult for her. When they tried to kick her out of school, my grandfather went to bat for her. After some negotiation, the principal said, okay, she can stay and finish high school, but she can't do any extracurricular activities and she can't have a locker. My grandfather took the deal and my mother finished high school although she wasn't allowed to walk across the stage with her classmates to get her diploma. Determined to keep up with her education, she enrolled in night school, picking classes led by professors who would let her bring an infant to class. She would show up with 2 duffel bags, one full of textbooks and one packed with diapers, bottles, and anything that would keep me interested and quiet for a few minutes.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. And, he went on to talk about his grandfather, his relationship with his grandparents, his dad, and all that. So I want to put back the same questions back to you. So what are some of the things that you remember from that conversation? If you can again put it back on the chat. His mom was not allowed on the stage with the others at graduation. Jeff Bezos had a tough start to life, way more compelling. His mother gave him a great start, strong family bond, his vision for the brand, his roots, his pregnant mom's determination, the early struggle, absolutely, all of that, right? And if I were to ask you to extend this and say, what do you make of Jeff Bezos as a person by hearing this conversation that he shares? He respects the hard work ethics. Through the story, he shows that he was a battler, more compelling. I wanted to know what happened next, but can't yet see the business point of his story. Yes. It was a longish text, so I had to put in some part of it, Catherine. Didn't take what he has for granted. Strong roots, value for education. Sounds much more human and normal. Family and by extension, his customers are important to him. And there's so much that comes out of this text when he shares a personal story to make a reference to his situation, to his context. So when you use a storyline to talk about what it means to you, your messaging automatically becomes much more memorable, more impactful, and the use of emotions. I think when Carolyn was reading it, she was saying, when she was not allowed to get on stage, it just connects straight to the emotions and then the messaging again makes it absolutely relatable. I could visualize her sitting in the school, classroom with the duffel bag and the baby bag and things like that, right? It's a very full of imagery, rich messaging. And irrespective of the outcome of the antitrust panel, just in terms of what it means, in terms of messaging and using a personal story to build that connection is absolutely amazing. I just want to stop the screen share for a minute and talk about something that happened with me. So about 3 years back, I was connected to the APAC head of learning of a British bank here in Hong Kong. A very good friend of mine did the connection. So I was very keen to make a good impression. I had met a lot of senior officers, and with my work in ANZ, I had a sense of banking, but I was meeting somebody from global markets, which was not my line. I was from retail banking. So I told my friend, please give me some time. I want to understand how storytelling is relevant for your business. It was difficult to find a common, time. He was like really busy, but I insisted and I got some time, and he was really kind. He took me through various situations where stakeholder conversations at risk and at global markets were very important, getting that engagement and how storytelling could be relevant. Come the day of the meeting, I still have a lot of butterflies in my stomach. I walk in, and after our initial card exchanges are over, like it's very traditional to do here in Hong Kong, the first question that was thrown to me was, how is storytelling relevant for our business? Thanks to all that discussion I had had with my friend, I was able to share some examples on how we can create that stakeholder engagement for his line of work. And after that, the conversation just flowed smoothly. And because my friend had set me up for success, I was able to bring out the relevance of storytelling in what was otherwise not a very directly relevant area. You're talking about risks and markets in banking. Sometimes the connects are not very obvious, but because my friend had set me up and helped me with it, I was able to have that conversation and connection. So storytelling is a really valuable tool in a business context, and we just need to find ways in which we can use it and harness this much better and be confident about using it as well. I want to actually put myself on a spot here. So, and let me, say that I have a little bit of a thick skin. So go on and say this. So when I talked about my experience about meeting this person at the bank, what did you think of me as a person? And please go ahead and say whatever, it's fine. It's a closed group. I know it's getting recorded, but it's fine. Go on. When I talked about this incident with, meeting the banker, what sense did that give of you, of me as a person? Being well prepared is key to your success. Thank you so much, Philippa. The first comment positive, so that's good. And I'm just going to make some notes, so please carry on. If you can again, being open to learning and asking for help. You're keen to shape the brief to be successful. Thank you so much. That you cared about what was important to the business. You've done your homework. Thank you. Well connected to be able to have the introduction. Thank you. You're insightful and make human connections. Thank you so much. And I think maybe I should just cut in before somebody says anything negative. I mean, these are, probably the whole incident when I narrated it was like sub 2 minutes kind of a narration. But these are all the things that you picked up about me as a person from that narration without me having to say that. So just for example, if I had introduced myself about this saying, I am very well prepared and that's very key to my success. I'm open to learning and I ask for help. I'm keen to shape the brief to be successful, that I care about what is important to business. I do my homework. I'm well connected. I'm insightful. What would you have made of me as a person when I make all this, sort of braggish remarks? And I'm calling it braggish straight there, setting it up. So it's fine. So it does come across as braggish, as somebody who, really thinks a little bit big of themselves, right? So that is the power of actually creating a narrative where you let the audience make up their mind about yourself, especially when you connect to people for the first time. What is it that you want to highlight about yourself? What are the characteristics that you want to highlight? And what can you bring in from your personal experience which lets the audience make up their mind instead of you having to state it and sounding very braggish and egoistic. So we say that actually character trumps credentials. I hate to use the word trumps now, but we'll just let that pass and move on. I just want to make a distinction between assertions, facts, and stories. I was listening to this podcast, 8 Words or Less. John Flint, who's the CEO of HSBC, is featured there, and he talks about Simon Sinek's Infinite Games, the book. And he ends the conversation by saying that, in my 30 years as a banker with HSBC, I would have done about 1 million PowerPoints, and I can guarantee you that nobody remembers a word of what I said. But every time I shared something personal about my highs, lows, about my failures, about things that have happened in my personal life or professional life, but every time I've shared a story, that's when people have remembered me. Because stories are more memorable than facts and figures. And I remember Brené Brown saying it so beautifully, that stories are actually data with a soul. And I think that sort of sums it up for me in terms of what it is. So to come back to, what is the distinction between an assertion, facts, and stories? And I'm going to go back to my ANZ days. It used to be called ANZ Grindlays Bank in India. And the elephant was the big picture. Not that it moved slowly, but it was all about, being steadfast and strong. So if I told you that ANZ is the best relationship bank, that would be an assertion. It's my opinion. It's a generalization. You might be banking with somebody else who might be, doing something better, but that's my opinion. So that's an assertion. If I were to say that ANZ is the best relationship bank and they have 85% customer retention rate. So that's a bit of a fact thrown in there. Somebody has done a customer survey, a pulse survey, and found out that 85% of the customers stay with them, or bulk of the banking is with ANZ. However, if I were to say that ANZ is the best relationship bank, in fact, back in 1997-98, when I used to head a branch in the suburbs of Mumbai, India, we used to have a lot of film producer accounts, a lot of film stars and actors. So it was a very popular posting for getting autographs and photographs. And at that time, there were no selfies. So on a Friday evening, one of the producers called me up and he said, my wife is stuck in Melbourne, Australia, and she needs to come back, and she's like, she can't get her booking. She had not done her reservation. Can you really help me get my wife back? And I'm thinking, this is not what I signed up when I signed up for banking and to be a branch manager. But I said, okay, here's a client who is looking for some help. So I contact our head office, try to find somebody there. It's a Friday evening. It's already late. But we managed to find a travel agent. And remember, these were the days before online booking platforms and all that. We're talking about 97, 98. We managed to find a ticket and we managed to get her home to Bombay. On Monday morning, I enter work and there's this beautiful bouquet of flowers with a handwritten note from the producer which said, "Thanks for getting my wife back home." And that is when it really also sunk in that when we say we are a relationship bank, we really walk the talk. We are there for the client in whatever they want to do, banking and non-banking. And that's why I believe ANZ is a relationship bank. Now, I said this, it's, as an anecdote that happened for me at work. And if I were to ask you tomorrow to tell me, do you remember, can you relate this incident? I'm sure most of you can, about what happened and, this producer who got his wife home and things like that. And that makes it really memorable in terms of any anecdotes or examples that you share about work. Instead of, again, saying ANZ is a relationship bank, we have an 85% customer retention rate. So part of all the stories it does is not really, just convince you or change your mind immediately, but it opens your mind to consider another perspective. And especially in these days where we need to hear different voices, that's what stories really do. It helps us make sense of the world, and it helps us connect and engage better. So we keep talking about stories, but what is a story in a business context? And there are a few markers to it. And this is why I believe stories are as much a science as an art. So it's not something just for a few people. So typically stories would have a time marker or a place marker. It would be back in 97, yesterday when I was walking down the road, 3 weeks back, there would be some kind of a time marker, place marker that's happening. Stories would also have a sequence of events. First this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. So a sequence of events, then you're listening to a story. Stories are rich with characters. There are people in stories and there are conversations, and that makes it, again, very rich. And most importantly, in a story, there is a reveal. There is that aha moment, something that tells you, oh, this is what happened, something which is out of ordinary. And while all these are great in terms of stories, what makes it a story in a business context is when you have a business point. Why are you saying that story? And, to take this back to, just to deconstruct it, to take it back to when I talked about, wearing a mask and walking on the road, that was a reveal on the story. And the business point there was to say that we believe in all these verbal and physical cues. We need to actually verbalize our thoughts and have a, look at a storytelling kind of an aspect, bringing into our conversation. And this frames what a story is. So if we had a normal meeting kind of a thing, I would have asked, somebody to deconstruct this for me. But, in the webinar style, I think we just move on. And the other related point that I want to make, that it's not always just personal stories. A lot of the times we are told that, we are technical people, we don't get personal, we are like a bit hands-off. But stories are there everywhere, and it can be about everything. So just for example, it could be a story about your product, about the origins of your company. It could be about something in terms of innovation where your product didn't work initially, there's a failure story attached to it. So it's not always just a personal story. It could be something linked to your company, your founder. It could be linked to a business situation. It could be relating to some insight that you gained because of failure. So various reasons why you could be sharing stories. So if you think initially you're not comfortable with sharing a personal story, it's still all right. There are other modes in which you can share stories and, really connect to people. So I listed out some of the places, and I want to share some examples as we go along about stories. So we talked about connection, and I shared a story about, my connection story. We talked about clarifying strategy or change, and this has happened to us as an organization. We used to be running in-person stories. So we use a framework called as a clarity story framework. So we say in the past, we used to run in-person sessions, and then COVID happened. So now we are looking at all these online forums, Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Blue Jeans and everything else, where we have actually chunked learning and made them modular, made them available to people in a much more easier way, so that we can still democratize learning and make it available for everybody. So clarifying something like this in terms of your change strategy could be a story. We talk about simplifying complexity. We don't want to talk about jargons. We don't want to make it complex language. We want to keep it simple. And I just want to share a video about somebody who does it really well. This is Indra Nui talking about how she simplifies complex. I'm going to play the video and I'll put the volume up, and I hope you're able to hear it. In case you're not, please put it on the chat and we'll see what we can do. Okay, here we go.
Please.
What's your hip pocket skill?
You know, interestingly, over my entire career, what I've been known for is making simple the complex, whatever the issue is. And if you gave it to Indra, it will get addressed. And it'll sometimes be areas that have nothing to do with. I'll give you one. When we bought Quaker Oats, we had to go through the FTC process. It was a long FTC process. And Steve Reinemann, who was CEO, and myself, we had not been through an FTC process of that size and scope. The lawyers were handling it, but lawyers speak in legalese. And Steve walked into my office one day and said, I want you to take over the FTC process. I said, I've got post-merger integration to worry about. I'm CFO and president. I've got too much to do. He just looked at me and said, I want you to take over the FTC process, working with the lawyers, of course, because he wanted it demystified. I said, fine, I'll work with the lawyers and take it over. I went to school on the FTC process. You know, what happens all the way down to the white paper? How do you talk to the commissioners? How do you make the case? What's the econometric analysis that has to be done? I became a student. And I could now explain in very simple terms to my CEO what needed to be done and how we can influence the process so that everything is stated in simple language for people to understand, as opposed to always talking in legalese. I'm sure the FTC understands legal, but as people who are so dependent on the outcome of the process, we have to understand every part of the process. So if I go back through my entire career, Dan, anywhere.
I just want to stop this here. So, where do you think, when you want to communicate in business, where do you think you could use this example? And, all the examples that I share are some things that I look to use in a business context. Say, when I want to talk to somebody and tell them that, we need to keep this really simple at work. So I want you to look at all these examples from that lens on where in your work situation could you be using this example to make a point.
Please.
Let's say you want to change perspective, and I want to bring in this, example. So in India, water is a big problem everywhere, and women walk long distances, like in Africa, and like in a lot of other places in the world, walk a long distances carrying these pots on their head to pick up water. Sometimes they have another pot on their hip. Sometimes they have a baby on the other hip. And it's not an easy process at all. And this is a gender issue which people have been trying to tackle for a very, very long time. So we were working with a group, a friend of mine's NGO, in a place called Jawahar in the outskirts of Maharashtra, India. And they brought in these water rollers. And what the water rollers did is something really interesting, because before that, they were walking around in the villages saying, your wife is carrying all these heavy things. Why don't you give her a hand? And the men folk there wouldn't move. You also had teenage sons in the house who were not going to school, not doing anything, but not really helping the mother bring the water. So it was sort of something which was relegated to the women. And it was affecting not just the mother, it was also affecting the daughters in the house, because they weren't allowed to go to school because they were busy collecting water. So when the water rollers came in, it sort of ungendered the whole carrying water process. It became a toy, it became a technical tool, it became a technological thing. And here you had all the boys and the men running saying, oh, it's a vehicle, it's a toy, I can put water in it and I could push it along. So you could be fighting this as a gender issue, or you could be looking at it as, how do I design an intervention around this to bring an innovation into this space, which will ultimately, of course, ungender the problem, but without having to hit my head against a wall saying, men need to pitch in, do this, do that, in a very sermonical kind of a way. So when we talk to people about looking out of the box and coming up with design solutions, which will take care of overcoming entrenched views, what is your water roller moment? Could be a great question to ask. So again, where in work could you be using this? anywhere where you needed to tackle, entrenched views or biases, how do you look at design and technology as a solution to deal with it? So this is something, again, feel free to put in the chat on where you could be using it at work, or, it's something amazing to really implement change without, like I said, banging my head against the wall kind of feeling. So how do you change perspectives? I'd also heard about this lady, Chen, who used to work with the Stanford Design Center for Social Impact. And one of the things that, I use Dilbert often as a reference for, grounding ourselves. We always talk about, when we talk about innovation and technology and product, we talk about how do we add more features and more features and more features. And that's the thing, right? So before you know, you have something which is a lot of features, but maybe not something which is very useful, or adding all those features has made your product much more expensive and complicated to use. So Jane Chen was working with a Stanford research team, and the project that she took on was looking at deaths, infantile deaths of premature babies. And there were about millions of babies dying every year because they didn't have access to an incubator like it is in a first world nation. And they really wanted to tackle it. So a group of them worked on it and broke down the incubator to what is it, bare bones basis, what does it do? It gives warmth. So what if I actually create a sleeping bag with a heating pad, which is reusable, which makes it accessible to everybody? And the incubators this is around 2005 when she started working on this. At a hospital, it used to be about $20,000 to $40,000 to get an incubator, and even access for women who didn't have access to an hospital. They brought it down to the bare bones and created this sleeping bag. It was called Embrace. That was a brand, and they launched it in 2010. And the cost of the product came down to $25, which even in an underdeveloped nation was something that could give access to a wider range of people. And that year, when it was launched, about 3 million babies were saved from premature death because of Embrace these bags. So again, when we look at products and design, if we want to talk to our design team specifically and tell them, less is more. What is the bare bones things that we can put in to ensure that consumer benefits from the product rather than making it feature heavy? This could be an example that could be shared to make that point. We get asked this a lot often on whether, you can use stories in high stake conversations, whether it is something or, which is only for talking to your team or in a social context. And Bob Iger, who was the past CEO of Disney, he talked about, his stint when he became the CEO, and he writes about it in the book Ride of a Lifetime. And he was talking about, his first board meeting as a CEO, and Disney Animation had had such a tough time with the CEO change, with a lot of cases going on. So this was October 2005, his first board meeting. He goes into the boardroom, everybody's seated around this big round board table, and he says, Disney Animation is in a mess. Now, that was not something that they didn't know about. The rest of the board members knew that it was in a mess, but he decided to share a story to make that point. So he says, gentlemen, a couple of years back, we went to Hong Kong Disneyland, and we were watching that parade that happens, the fabled Disney parade. We had all the floats coming. We had all the characters coming there. And, the first few characters which came in were the classic Walt Disney characters. You had Pinocchio, you had Cinderella, you had Snow White. And then there were some characters which came from Michael Eisner's early days, which was like Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin. And then there were the characters which came out, which was from our partnership with Pixar, which is Finding Nemo, Toy Story, and Monsters. And he said, do you know what was odd about this? And the board members were like taken aback and they were looking at each other. And he said, we haven't had a single new character in the last 10 years. And for an animation company, having characters is bread and butter. That runs the theme parks, that runs your rides, it runs all the merchandise and everything else. And this triggered the conversation. After all that discussion, they spent the whole next 6 hours discussing this in this first board meeting. And after that, he put up a proposal to actually have a conversation to buy Pixar. And that set him up to go and have that conversation with Steve Jobs, who was holding 50% stake in Pixar, to say, how do we merge these two companies? And I share this again with the thing that it was a very high stake conversation. It was a merger. Disney Animation was in a mess. He had to really bring that imagery of what it meant not to have new characters in to make that point about the need for the merger. And subsequently, of course, the merger happened. Ed Catmull and the team, the Disney and Pixar team moved in. They maintained their own solo cycle. Bolt came out. It won an Oscar. And then we had Frozen, which not only won an Oscar, or many Oscars, but it also came to a point where the merchandise from Frozen sold much more than the movie made. So that is the importance of actually having that conversation. So even in a high stake conversation, you could use stories. It is to the point of saying, what is that central lever in our business that we need to leverage to turn around our business and product? So stories everywhere, definitely. I just want to talk about one last incident before we go into some tips on what about story. How are we doing on time?
Yeah, I was just about to jump in, Soundari. We've got 8 minutes left, so we've got a few questions coming in, and we need to talk to Matt. So yeah.
Okay. So I just want to quickly talk about Jeff Su and his pharmacy in Ulladulla. We talk about being human, we talk about being connected, and I think some of these customer-centric activities are what really make a difference. So this was New Year's Eve in Ulladulla in Australia, the bushfires really wreaking ravage. Jeff and his partner Tim kept their pharmacy open, and they kept supplying medicines not only to the stranded travelers, but also to isolated patients. There were severe power outages, as you would all know, and they went manual, they wrote out bills, or they let the customers just take the medicines and go. And when the power outage became just too much, he went and helped at the rescue center, at the evacuation center, opened up his home for people to come in and use. And these are the kind of incidences which give us faith and restore faith in humanity and motivate us to be better humans. So I just want to talk about the fact that stories are indeed a really pull strategy. We don't need to convince anybody. Once you've shared a story, people get the point. And just leave you with a few tips, which is always remember why you're telling the story, the framing on the relevant statement as to, and that helps keep it really crisp and make it open for people to listen to your story. How do you keep stories real? Ground them in facts. Only authentic stories, not made up ones. No fake news here for us at business. Keep it short. Have a variety of stories, so don't be a one-story wonder. And stories are there everywhere. It could be your stories that today that you heard at the webinar, something that was an experience with somebody else. And most importantly, practice. It takes a lot of deliberate practice for us to really get into that. And right now, in terms of, I think of my pottery example of making multiple pots to get that final finished piece. So I want to leave you with one last word, which is on this book by Scott Hartley, Fussy and the Techie, as it says. So AI is going to keep getting better and better. And surely will be even better as the days go by. So as human beings, the antidote to redundancy is not to become more technical or a technocrat, it's to become more human. So story on, use stories to engage, connect, make sense of the world, and be more relatable to your audience. And with that, we run this as an online session. We use a virtual workshop mode on this now because everything has gone virtual. I will leave some details later with Ross, and I will leave it open for any questions. And thank you all so much for joining and making the time and making this interesting. And thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Soundari. That was amazing. And the fact that I've been watching the participants, no one's left. So that's what a great outcome as a speaker. That's fantastic. I'm going to go to Matt quickly. Still hard at work there. What have you made of, what's your summary, Matt?
Should I stop?
There's a mute button, sorry.
Should I stop sharing my screen? So
that would be a good idea. I think, Soundari?
Sure. Thank you, Soundari. Wow, there was so much in there. Look, I tried to do my best to cherry pick some highlights. So I just have a poor old fellow here looking a little bit bewildered working from home. That initial conversation about like setting the scene for the situation that we all find ourselves. I've got a very white looking CEO blurting out facts and figures over and over again with the question, why don't we use more stories in business? So I thought that was a nice frame for that question because the audience there are fast asleep. Soundari's story about smiling with the mask on, I turned into a short little comic with the thought bubble where she's saying, I wonder why he didn't smile back. I've got the two Apple and Amazon CEOs with a couple of quotes to kind of contrast their two approaches, and a few other tips here about how I really love that bit about how telling a story can lead others to infer things about you. So you should let them make their mind up rather than espousing your own virtues. And then just in the corner, we finished with what makes a story, that kind of structure, breaking it down, and the tips for how to get better at it in the corner there. And then there's the water roller, because that was a really iconic part of the presentation, I think, bringing it back to innovation and how it can solve real world problems. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. Carol, we've got some questions.
Fantastic. We've got 3 questions. This one is from Moshmi. What is the most effective form of storytelling for internal communications during such a time where everything is virtual? What works, written or visual?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for helping me with the questions. That makes it easier. I've pulled it up now. Thanks, Moshmi. I think it's a bit of both, I would say, though our work focuses around oral storytelling. I do see now that a lot of CEOs are connecting with their teams using written communication, because you can get onto so many Zoom calls, there's Zoom fatigue and all that. So while you can share stories verbally when you speak, people are definitely using written, and we are using it as well to talk to our clients, to, get them to engage with us in a slightly non-obtrusive way. So instead of sending mailers and a lot of downloading information, definitely in the written world, stories are going to be equally important.
Our next one's from Melinda, and if we can just unmute her, Ross. Melinda Coyne.
You're live now, Melinda?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thanks, Ross, Carolyn and Soundari for hosting this. It's fabulous. I was interested to know, in many, at executive level, steercos and things like that, you really see lots of data and no storytelling. And I was wondering, Soundari, why you thought that was and how we can influence that as comms people. Because I know I'm anaesthetised to death when I look at this, and I do wonder, given the questions at Steerco, have they really understood what's presented to them anyway? I mean that respectfully, I'm genuinely asking.
Thank you so much, Melinda. And I think we have a rich group of people here who can probably answer it better. I just want to say that I think one, to quote Gandhi, be the change that you want to see. So I think we can all, as comms people, really lead that, answer in stories, definitely, for things at steering committees, executives. One of the things that we found that especially at CEO level, people don't have the time. So keeping the stories really short and crisp would do it. And you would find more people definitely using. The thought that, it's going to be really long and elaborate probably prevents people from using stories. That could be one thing. And I'm very happy to hear from more people about it on their perspective on,
We've hit time, and Jody, you had a question, but we might get Soundari to come back to you. I'll just hand back to Ross to wrap up.
Thank you, Carolyn. Look, that was an absolutely amazing session. Some of the key points, we're running out of time. I don't have time to go over all of them, but the ones that I really loved, stories are about data stories are data with a soul. I really loved that. And look, I think summing up a lot of my other comments were was one of your comments about stories motivating us to be better people and better communicators in the business sense, I guess, is an extension to that. So Soundari, thank you very much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure. There was so many gems in that. Not only was this a live session, we will also be, or we have recorded this session, and in a few days' time, this webinar will be up on the Iabc Asia Pacific YouTube channel. So you'll be able to review that there. Somebody asked about, I think it was Melinda, asked about the slides, so you'll be able to see the whole presentation, including the slides there. Just a couple of highlights coming up for Iabc Asia Pacific in the next few weeks. Of course, this evening, as we do every Wednesday evening, we have our midweek drop-in. That is at 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time tonight. You can check the times for your local area. If you'd like to participate in that, you can book a spot in that at iabcapac.com. That's our website. Also, our next free webinar is on the 14th of October at 2 p.m. We'll be talking with Jerry McCusker about controlling the crisis narrative, a very topical webinar coming up. So I'm really looking forward to that. And Jerry's another fantastic speaker, very dynamic, and his business, The Drill, works with a lot of organizations in this region, helping them to control the crisis narrative. So that's going to be a fantastic seminar. And you can book for that at our website, again, IABC APAC, iabcapac.com. 14th of October at 2 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Well, that brings us to a close to today's session. On behalf of the board and our president, Christy, thank you all for joining us. A huge thank you to Soundari for your presentation on stories, and thanks finally to all of the participants today. It was great to have you here, so I'm going to draw it to close. Thanks, and I hope to see you next month.
Thanks, Ross.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed myself. And thanks, Matt. That's beautifully presented. I'm looking forward to having a detailed look at it later. And thanks, everybody, for organizing it. And do stay in touch and do connect.
Thank you.